My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 62 years old, and my story begins the day I was discharged from the hospital after surgery. I sent a simple message to my only son, asking if he could come pick me up, hoping he'd walk through those sliding doors with a smile. Instead, his cold reply, "Just order an Uber," cut through me sharper than any scalpel the doctors had used. That was the moment I realized something inside my family had broken, and I knew I'd have to make a choice that would change the rest of my life. White right pointing backhand index. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. I still remember the smell of disinfectant that clung to my clothes as the nurse wheeled me toward the glass doors of the clinic. The hall was too bright, too white, and too quiet, except for the squeak of her shoes on the tile. My surgery had gone well, the doctor said. "Rest and let someone take care of you," he reminded me, as if those words still meant something in my life. I nodded politely, but inside, I already knew better. As the automatic doors slid open, the cool air outside hit me in the face. It should have been refreshing, but instead it felt sharp, biting. I clutched my small tote bag against my stomach, the one with a change of clothes, my medication, and the discharge papers folded neatly inside. My hands trembled slightly, not from pain, but from something heavier, disappointment that was waiting for me in my phone. Earlier that morning, lying in the hospital bed, I'd sent a simple message in the family group chat, "Who can drive me home from the clinic today?" It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even an urgent plea. It was a mother asking her son for a favor, expecting at least a sliver of warmth. The reply came 20 minutes later. "Just order an Uber. I'm busy watching TV." That one line hit harder than the 4-needle they'd pushed into my arm yesterday. For a moment, I thought maybe he was joking. Maybe he'd come walking through the door grinning, saying, "Gotcha, Mom." But no. My son, David, wasn't the joking type. Not with me. Not anymore. I didn't even have time to process before another message appeared in the group. His wife, Hannah, a woman who had once sat across from me at Thanksgiving, smiling politely, asking me for recipes, pretending to care. She typed, "Stay in the clinic longer. Life feels peaceful without you." I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. They glared back at me from the small screen, cold and final. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight, as if someone had slipped a stone down there. The nurse who pushed my wheelchair noticed the shift in my face. "Is everything okay?" She asked gently. I forced a smile. "Yes, just tired." But tired wasn't the right word. Abandoned was. When she left me at the cab, I sat there for a few seconds longer than necessary, pretending to look through my bag, as if someone was about to pull up any minute. Maybe David had changed his mind. Maybe Hannah didn't mean it. Maybe. But cars came and went, strangers loading luggage, hugging loved ones, starting their rides home. Not me. Not a single familiar face pulled up. Finally, I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app. My fingers shook as I pressed the button. It felt humiliating. I was 62 years old, fresh out of surgery, and my only son couldn't be bothered to lift a finger for me. The car arrived quickly, a grey sedan with a faint dent in the side. The driver, a man in his 40s with tired eyes, hopped out and opened the back door. "Need a hand?" I nodded, grateful for the kindness of a stranger, something my own family hadn't offered. Sliding into the seat, I adjusted my coat and pressed the seatbelt across my chest. The fabric rubbed against the incision under my blouse, a dull reminder of what my body had just endured. The ride began in silence. I watched the clinic fade in the rearview mirror, its sterile glass doors shrinking behind me. My neighborhood was 20 minutes away, but every second stretched longer than the last. The driver cleared his throat. "Rough day?" he asked, not prying, just noticing. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to spill everything right there, to confess that my son had chosen a TV show over me, that my daughter-in-law saw me as nothing but a burden, that my heart hurt more than my stitched-up body. But instead, I forced out something like that. He nodded and turned up the radio slightly. A soft country song filled the car. I stared out the window, letting the music blur into background noise. Every streetlight we passed cast a quick flash of light across my face, like a reminder, you're going home alone. Home. The word felt bitter now. When the car pulled into my driveway, the house looked colder than I remembered. The curtains were drawn, the porch light off. My son's car wasn't in the driveway. Of course not. He hadn't lived here in years. But still, part of me expected him to at least check in after sending a message like that. The driver helped me out of the car. "Take care of yourself," he said kindly. I murmured a thank you and stood at the foot of my steps, clutching my bag with one hand and the railing with the other. Each step was slow, deliberate, as if I were climbing a mountain. My chest ached, not from the surgery, but from the silence that filled the house when I opened the door. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The blanket folded neatly on the couch. A few unopened letters on the kitchen counter. The faint hum of the refrigerator. Too neat. Too quiet. I set my bag down and lowered myself onto the couch, staring at the dark TV screen. That was when it hit me fully. Not just the words they had typed, but the meaning behind them. My son and his wife didn't see me as part of their lives anymore. They saw me as a weight, a problem, a disturbance in their so-called peace. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the tears come, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet stream down my cheeks. My body needed rest, but my mind was racing. How did it come to this? I thought of the years I'd spent raising David. The mornings I woke up early to pack his lunches. The nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home from high school football games. The times I went without so he could have more. All those sacrifices, and here I was, left to order a ride home from strangers. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. My heart jumped. For a brief second, I thought maybe David had reconsidered. Maybe he'd text something, anything, that showed he cared. I grabbed it quickly, swiping the screen. A notification from the pharmacy. Your prescription is ready for pickup. That was it. I dropped the phone back onto the table and let out a bitter laugh. My chest tightened, not from the incision, but from the weight pressing down inside me. Lying back on the couch, I realized something important. This wasn't just neglect. It was rejection. A choice. My son and his wife had chosen not to be there for me when I needed them most. And choices have consequences. That night, as I lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant barking of a neighbor's dog, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wasn't going to beg for their love anymore. I wasn't going to chase after their scraps of attention. If they thought life was peaceful without me, I'd show them just how wrong they were. The cold ride home had ended, but something much colder had started inside me. The night dragged on with no sleep. My body begged for rest, but my mind had turned into a restless storm. Every creak in the house echoed like an accusation. Every shadow on the ceiling looked like a reminder that I was unwanted in my own son's world. By dawn, I sat up on the couch, groggy and stiff, and knew I couldn't keep lying there pretending things would change. I pulled on a coat and stepped outside. The air was still sharp from the night before, a thin frost glittering on the lawn, and the street was eerily quiet. It wasn't unusual for me to take morning walks, back when my health allowed, but this one felt different. Each step down the porch felt like I was dragging my disappointment along with me, heavy as bricks. The sidewalk stretched ahead, damp with dew. I wrapped my scarf tighter and started walking, partly to clear my head, partly because being inside that silent house felt unbearable. My legs were slow, still weak from the procedure, but stubbornness kept them moving. Half a block down, I passed Mrs. Patel's house. She was out early, sweeping her porch in her pink slippers. She spotted me and waved with the kind of warmth I hadn't seen in my own family's eyes for months. "You're up early," she called. I forced a small smile. Couldn't sleep. "Take it easy," she said. "Don't push yourself." Her voice carried the kindness I had been starving for, and for a fleeting second, I wanted to stop, maybe even tell her everything. But I kept walking. If I opened that door, I might not stop crying, and I wasn't ready for an audience. By the time I reached the corner, my breath had turned shallow. The scar tugged under my coat, reminding me of how fragile I still was. I slowed down, gripping the edge of a metal railing near the bakery to steady myself. The smell of bread drifted out into the street, warm and tempting, but my stomach was too tight to consider food. That was when it happened. The sidewalk beneath my left foot gave way with a sharp crack. At first, it felt like stepping into a loose tile, but then the ground crumbled further, concrete breaking apart like brittle crackers. My leg plunged into a gap I hadn't noticed, and before I could balance, my entire body pitched forward. The world tilted. My tote bag flew from my shoulder. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of me. My cheek scraped against the rough cement, and my palms burned from trying to catch myself. Pain shot up my side where my incision still healed, a hot stab that made my vision blur. For a moment, I just lay there, stunned, listening to the faint traffic in the distance, the flutter of a pigeon taking off nearby. My heart pounded like a drum. Then a voice shouted, "Are you okay?" I blinked up to see a young man jogging toward me from across the street. His earbuds dangled, phone in his hand, worry etched across his face. He crouched down beside me. "Don't move yet," he said, reaching to steady me. "That sidewalk's a mess. You fell right through it." I groaned softly, half from pain, half from embarrassment. "I'm fine," I muttered, though my body screamed the opposite. "You don't look fine," he replied firmly. "Let me help you sit up." He slid an arm under my shoulders and carefully lifted me onto the curb. My palms were scraped raw, little beads of blood welling at the surface. My coat sleeve was torn at the elbow. Weiss, the ache near my incision had grown sharper, making every breath feel like a chore. "Should I call an ambulance?" the young man asked. Panic jolted through me. The last thing I wanted was to go back to that clinic, to be discharged again to the same cold silence. "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "Please, no ambulance. I just need a minute." He looked uncertain, but he didn't argue. He handed me my tote bag, which had landed a few feet away. I clutched it to my chest like a lifeline. Another voice called out then, Mrs. Patel again, rushing down the sidewalk in her slippers, broom still in her hand. She must have seen me fall. "Oh dear Lord, are you hurt?" she cried, crouching beside me. "I'm okay," I lied again, though the pain in my side told the truth. The young man pointed to the gap in the sidewalk where broken chunks of cement had caved in, exposing a dark hole beneath. "This thing's dangerous. Someone's going to get badly hurt if the city doesn't fix it." Mrs. Patel glanced at me, worry all over her face. "She just had surgery," she told him, lowering her voice. "She shouldn't even be walking so soon." Heat rose in my cheeks, not just from embarrassment, but from the sting of her words being true. I hadn't told her about the cold ride home, or the cruel messages, but somehow she could sense the truth I tried to hide. I was fragile, too fragile to be alone out here. "Let's get you home," she said gently. I wanted to refuse. My pride screamed to push everyone away, to stand up and walk back on my own 2 feet. But my body betrayed me. My knees trembled as I tried to rise, and the young man quickly caught me under the arms. Together, they guided me slowly down the block, step by step, until we reached my house. Mrs. Patel fussed over me like a mother hen, making sure I was steady before letting go. "Do you have someone inside to look after you?" she asked softly, her eyes searching mine. I hesitated, then shook my head. "No, just me." Her face tightened, but she didn't press. "Call me if you need anything. I mean it, day or night." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you." The young man gave me a reassuring smile before jogging off, earbuds back in place. Mrs. Patel lingered a moment longer, then finally returned to her house. Inside, I sank onto the couch, heart pounding, side throbbing, palm stinging. The scrape on my cheek burned when I touched it. I should have been grateful I hadn't broken a bone, but instead, a wave of despair washed over me. Not even 24 hours after being discharged, I was already falling apart, literally into the cracks of a broken sidewalk. And who was there to catch me? Not my son. Not his wife. Just strangers and neighbors. I stared at my torn sleeve, the blood on my palms, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just bad luck. It was a message, loud and clear. I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for people who had already abandoned me. If I wanted to survive, not just physically, but emotionally, I'd have to find strength in places I hadn't looked before. That realization didn't come with triumph or relief. It came with a deep, aching sadness. But it was real. That afternoon, as I cleaned my wounds at the kitchen sink and taped a bandage clumsily over my palm, I thought about the crack in the sidewalk. It felt like a metaphor for everything in my life. Stable on the surface, broken underneath, waiting for the right moment to swallow me whole. But I wasn't going to let it. Not this time. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, trembling, sore, exhausted, but alive. And as the late sunlight filtered through the blinds, I made another silent promise. If my own family could watch me fall without reaching out a hand, then I would learn to stand without them. Even if it meant standing on broken ground. Even if it meant standing on broken ground. The words clung to me like a secret vow as I sat in the dim kitchen, my palm throbbing beneath its clumsy bandage, the faint scent of antiseptic still stinging my nose. I thought that promise would stay locked inside me, just a silent note to survive, unheard and unseen. But life, I was learning, had a way of carrying your pain further than you ever intended. By the next morning, the story was already out. It started small, innocent, almost. Mrs. Patel, ever the watchful neighbor, stopped by with a tray of steaming chai and a plate of parathas. She didn't say it outright, but the worry etched into her face told me she hadn't slept much after watching me stumble home the day before. I couldn't stop thinking, she said gently as she set the tray on the table. You look so pale, Beta. I know you said you're fine, but falling like that, after surgery, it's not nothing. I tried to brush it off, lifting the cup with my good hand. I just need rest. That's all. But Mrs. Patel wasn't one to keep quiet. Later that afternoon, when I peeked through the blinds, I caught her chatting with another neighbor, her hands moving animatedly, eyes darting toward my house. I didn't need to hear the words. The sympathetic clucks and head shakes told me everything. By evening, 3 more neighbors had just happened to check in. One brought soup, another a loaf of bread, another only lingering questions masked a small talk. How are you holding up? Do you have anyone staying with you? Are you managing okay all alone? I smiled, nodded, lied. But behind their polite concern, I sensed something else. A story taking shape, piece by piece, passed from porch to porch, whispered over fences and driveways. The woman fresh out of surgery, abandoned by her family, stumbling into a broken sidewalk. The lonely figure in the window at night, lights off, curtains half drawn. The story spread like fire catching dry leaves. At first, it stayed within the neighborhood. But neighborhoods are like veins. They connect to larger bodies. One morning, as I shuffled to the corner store for milk, the cashier, a woman I barely knew, paused in the middle of ringing up my purchase. I heard you had a fall, she said softly, as if afraid the words themselves might bruise me. I froze. My hands tightened around the carton. It was nothing, I said too quickly, my voice brittle. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me but didn't want to push. Take care of yourself, okay? People are worried. Worried. That word dug deeper than it should have. Where had all this worry been when I was discharged from the hospital with no one waiting for me? Where was it when my phone buzzed with messages that cut deeper than any scar? It was almost laughable. Strangers cared, while my own family had chosen silence. Still, I couldn't escape the spreading. A week later, a note appeared in my mailbox. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanted, uneven. "Saw you fall. Don't know your name, but if you ever need groceries or a ride, here's my number. Don't be shy." There was no signature, just 10 digits scrawled at the bottom. I folded the paper carefully, tucked it in the kitchen drawer. I didn't call, but the thought lingered. Someone I didn't even know had offered me a ride, when my own son hadn't offered me a chair. The whispers grew louder still when the city finally came to repair the broken sidewalk. A bright orange crew set up barriers, jackhammers rattling from morning to noon. Wakers in neon vests pointed at the spot, shaking their heads as if even the concrete knew shame. Neighbors gathered to watch, their conversations drifting like smoke. I sat behind the curtain, hidden, but I heard enough. They say she was all alone when she fell. Didn't her son move her in after the hospital? Moved her in, yes, but that doesn't mean he looks after her. The last voice belonged to Mrs. Davis, the neighborhood's unofficial broadcaster of gossip. I pictured her pursed lips, the self-satisfied way she tilted her chin. She'd been waiting for a story like this, something she could dress in pity and parade around. And yet, even as anger flared in me, another truth rose quietly beneath it. They weren't wrong. The story spread beyond faces I knew. One Sunday, when I tried to attend service at the local church, thinking maybe a hymn could drown the noise in my chest, I felt the weight of eyes on me the moment I walked through the door. Heads turned, conversations hushed. Sister Margaret, who usually greeted me with a hug, pressed my hands a little too tightly. "So good to see you out," she whispered, her voice lined with pity instead of joy. As the choir sang, I tried to focus on the notes, but all I could hear were the murmurs circling behind me, fragments carried on the echo of the vaulted ceiling. She looked so weak. Poor thing, alone at her age. I heard her son hasn't been around. By the time the final hymn ended, my chest was burning. I slipped out before anyone could stop me, the sound of organ pipes chasing me into the street. That night, lying in bed, I realized something terrifying. My silence was no longer my own. It belonged to everyone else now. My story, twisted, simplified, stripped of all the messy truth, was spreading faster than I could contain it. And yet, there was another side to it. For every hushed whisper, there was also a knock on the door. For every judgmental glance, there was a hand extended. Soup, letters, phone numbers scribbled on scraps of paper. The same story that stripped me of dignity also stitched me to people I never expected. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch trying to soak a little sunlight into my bones, a boy from down the street stopped by. He couldn't have been more than 12. "My mom said you fell," he bloated, holding out a paper bag. "She baked cookies, said you should eat something sweet." His honesty made me laugh, a sound so rare it startled me. "Thank you," I said, taking the bag. He shrugged, already running back down the block, but his small gesture lingered longer than any sermon. The story had spread. Yes, it burned me. Yes, it stripped me bare. But it also cracked something open, the same way the sidewalk had. And through that crack, light began seeping in, uninvited but undeniable. And through that crack, light began seeping in, uninvited but undeniable. But the very next morning, that light was drowned out by the cold glare of my phone screen. I hadn't charged it overnight, too tired to care, so it lay heavy on the nightstand with a faint red sliver of battery left. I picked it up lazily, thumb brushing across the glass. The screen flickered awake, and my breath froze. 67 missed calls. The number glared back at me. Impossible, absurd, almost unreal. For a moment, I wondered if my phone had glitched, if some cruel bug had stacked old alerts into a single shocking figure. But no, the call log told the truth. Line after line of the same number. My son's number. The first call had come at 11:43 p.m., the last at 4:26 a.m. In between, the minutes bled together into a relentless pattern. Sometimes he called back-to-back, 3 times in the same minute. Other times, there were small gaps, 5 minutes, 10, maybe 20, before another burst of ringing. I hadn't heard a single one. At some point in the night, I'd silenced my phone out of habit, unwilling to hear its sharp buzz against the wooden nightstand. I thought I was silencing the world. I hadn't realized I was silencing him. My chest tightened as I scrolled, my fingers trembling, my eyes burning. What could drive someone to call 6 to 7 times in one night? Panic? Anger? Desperation? I pressed the phone against my lips, as if it could answer. The battery died before I could bring myself to call him back. For a long moment, I just sat there, phone lifeless in my hands, the silence louder than any ringtone. Then I plugged it into the charger, pacing the room as the screen slowly, agonizingly, returned to life. When it did, the call started again. The first vibration nearly knocked the phone off the table. His name lit up the screen. Daniel. I froze, my hand hovering. All the words I'd rehearsed in sleepless nights, sharp, calm, forgiving, furious, evaporated. My body refused to move. By the time I gathered the courage, the call had already gone to voicemail. Seconds later, it rang again, and again, and again. The sound filled the room, echoing off the walls, rattling inside me. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it seeped through my bones anyway. When I finally answered, my voice cracked like old wood. Hello. Silence. A shaky inhale. Then his voice, rushed and raw. Mom, are you there? Finally, thank God. My knees buckled, and I sank into the chair. Daniel, what is happening? His words tumbled out, frantic. I've been calling you all night. Why didn't you answer? Do you have any idea what that did to me? I closed my eyes, the weight of guilt pressing down. My phone was silenced. I didn't know. He cursed under his breath, a sound halfway between anger and relief. I thought something happened. I thought he cut himself off, his voice breaking. For a moment, we just breathed, the silence between us trembling. Finally, I whispered, why so many calls? He didn't answer right away. Then, because I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance again. The line crackled. My heart clenched. What do you mean? I asked carefully. He let out a long exhale, the kind you give when words weigh more than air. I messed up, Mom. I know I did. I've been avoiding things. But last night I couldn't stop thinking. About you. About everything. I thought maybe if I just kept calling, eventually. He trailed off, and in the pause, the unspoken words pressed harder than the spoken ones. Eventually, I'd forgive him. Eventually, I'd answer. Eventually, he'd stop being the son who left me to walk alone. I wanted to ask, to demand, but my throat closed around the questions. Instead, I said the simplest thing, 6 to 7 times. Daniel, that's not calling. That's desperation, he finished quietly. The word landed between us, sharp and bare. He started talking again, faster now, as if afraid I'd hang up. He told me he'd been sitting in his car outside his apartment all night, headlights off, just watching the sky. He said every time he closed his eyes, he saw me on that sidewalk, falling, lying there while the world turned away. He said he hated himself for not being there, for not even knowing until it was too late. And he said something else, something I hadn't expected. I didn't know how much people were talking, Mom. It's everywhere. At the store, at Wake, people keep bringing it up. I didn't realize how much I'd let you carry alone. I thought I could avoid it, but I can't anymore. Everyone knows, and his voice cracked. I can't hide from it, and I can't hide from you. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, as if that would steady me. So the story had spread further than I'd imagined. It had reached him, wrapped around his life like smoke he couldn't escape. That's what had driven him here, to my phone, again and again through the night. Not just guilt, not just love, exposure. For a moment, bitterness surged. Would he have called if no one else had noticed? If the world hadn't started whispering my name along with his. But beneath the bitterness, another feeling stayed, smaller, quieter, but there, relief. Because for the first time in weeks, my son wasn't silent. He wasn't pretending I didn't exist. We talked until the phone grew warm against my cheek. His words tumbled between apologies and confessions, mine caught between anger and fragile forgiveness. Sometimes we argued, voices rising, only to fall into sudden silences. Sometimes we just breathed together, the kind of quiet that hurt more than shouting. At one point, he whispered, "I kept thinking you wouldn't pick up because you couldn't. Because you were." He stopped, unable to finish. "I'm here," I said firmly, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "I'm still here." The truth was, I wasn't sure how much longer I'd want to be. But in that moment, for his sake, I claimed it. By the time the call ended, the morning sun had painted the room gold, catching on the edges of the curtains. My phone showed new numbers, 68 calls, 69, 70. But only one mattered, the one I'd finally answered. And as I set the phone down, my hands still trembling, I realized the story had shifted again. It was no longer just mine, or the neighbors, or the whispers in pews and checkout lines. It belonged to Daniel too now, stitched into his voice, his guilt, his desperate dialing. 6 to 7 missed calls, each one a reminder that silence carries louder than sound. Each one proof that even distance can't keep the truth from clawing its way through. And as the house finally fell quiet, I knew this was only the beginning of what those calls had unleashed. And as the house finally fell quiet, I knew this was only the beginning of what those calls had unleashed. The silence wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't heavy like it used to be, pressing into my chest, whispering that I was alone. Now, it hummed with the echo of Daniel's voice, carrying fragments of our broken night conversation. I thought maybe if I just kept calling. I didn't know how much people were talking. I can't hide from it, and I can't hide from you. His words lingered, filling corners of the room where dust had settled for years. They played back in uneven rhythms, sometimes warm, sometimes jagged, always pulling at me. I sat by the window, mug of coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the street outside. Morning had given way to noon, neighbors moving through their routines with practiced ease, mailboxes opened, dogs tugged on leashes, sprinklers hissed over lawns. Ordinary life marched on, indifferent to the storm still churning in me. Yet inside, something had shifted. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It wasn't joy, or healing, or even relief. It was quieter, stranger, like a room you'd walked through 1,000 times suddenly feeling rearranged. A different kind of peace. The phone lay on the table, screen dark, though every so often I caught myself checking for new calls. Part of me dreaded seeing his name again, but another part wanted it. When it finally buzzed, I jumped. One message. "I'm driving over. Don't shut the door this time." My fingers hovered above the screen, unsure whether to type back. Before I could decide, the engine of a car hummed outside. Through the curtain, I saw him, Daniel, stepping out of his old sedan, the one I used to nag him about keeping clean. His shoulders slumped, his clothes wrinkled, as if he hadn't slept. For a moment, instinct urged me to retreat, to let him knock and knock until the silence drove him away. But something heavier than instinct pulled me forward. I opened the door before his hand touched the knob. He froze, surprise flickering across his face. Then, carefully, he said, "Hi." I studied him, every detail sharper than it should have been. The way his hair curled the ends, the faint stubble shadowing his jaw, the nervous twitch in his fingers. My son. Older now, harder around the edges, but still mine. "Come in," I whispered. Inside, he moved like a guest, not like the boy who once left his sneakers in every corner of this house. He stood in the living room as if afraid to sit, his eyes scanning the space as though cataloging what had changed since he last belonged here. Finally, he lowered himself onto the couch. I didn't know if you'd actually let me in. I sat across from him, mug still in hand though I hadn't taken a sip. I almost didn't. He nodded, swallowing hard. I wouldn't have blamed you. For a while, we'll let the silence stretch. Not the brittle silence of avoidance, but the cautious kind, like standing on a frozen lake and testing each step before putting weight on it. He spoke first. Mom, I'm not here to fix everything in one day. I can't. I know that. But I couldn't stand another night like last night. I had to see you. His honesty disarmed me. I had expected rehearsed apologies, polished words meant to smooth things over. Instead, I got raw edges. I looked at him carefully. So what do you want from me, Daniel? His eyes flicked up, uncertain. A chance. Just a chance to sit with you. Talk. Even if it's awkward. Even if it's hard. I'll take that over nothing. The words landed heavier than he might have known. A chance. Such a small request. And yet it carried the weight of all those missed years, all those missed calls before last night 67. I set my mug down. All right. We'll start with that. And we did. At first, the conversation stumbled. He asked about the house. I asked about his job, both of us clinging to surface-level topics like lifeboats. But gradually, the rhythm shifted. Stories crept in, about the time he locked his keys in that same old sedan, about the coworker who drove him crazy with loud chewing, about the memory of his grandfather teaching him to ride a bike. Sometimes we laughed. Sometimes we fell into long pauses. But each pause felt less like a wall and more like a bridge we were still building plank by plank. At one point, he asked if he could make coffee. The simple act of watching him move through my kitchen, fumbling with spoons and sugar like he used to when he was 17, filled me with a strange warmth. Not joy exactly, not reconciliation, but something close to steady. When he returned with 2 steaming mugs, he said quietly, "It feels weird, being here. Familiar, but also fragile." "I know," I said. "It feels the same for me." He hesitated, then added, "But it feels better than being away." That night, after he left, I sat again by the window. The street was quiet, lamps humming against the dark. My phone buzzed once more. "Thanks for today. I'll try again tomorrow, if you'll let me." I didn't reply right away. I just stayed at the words until the screen dimmed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't dread the morning. Because peace, I realized, wasn't always the absence of conflict. Sometimes it was the fragile, trembling presence of connection trying to mend itself. Sometimes it was sitting across from someone who once hurt you deeply and choosing not to close the door again. It wasn't the peace I used to pray for, but it was peace all the same. A different kind of peace,